Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Lubkeman, Head of Foresight at the ETH here in Zurich, and your host for today's Global Dialogue, Global Lecture, and Dialogue entitled Designing Next Generation Robots. The ETH Global Lecture Series is a platform for contemporary topics to be discussed with outstanding global thinkers, and we are very, very fortunate today to have two amazing people. Every month, we bring individuals together to discuss their personal insights, interests, experiences, and expertise. In addition to simply satisfying our curiosity to learn, we also hope that these dialogues will expand our perspectives so we can broaden our thinking, challenge our own opinions, and through this, make an even more meaningful contribution to society. I am happy to be here and honored to host today's conversations with two wonderful individuals. First, we have Daniela Roos, the Director of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT. Hello, Daniela. Welcome. Great to have you here.
Hello, everyone.
She also served in the White House as a member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, on the Defense Innovation Board, and for the UN Pathways to Prosperity Commission. It's truly wonderful to have her coming to us from Boston. Her discussion partner is ETH's very own Robert Kachman, an assistant professor who established the Soft Robotics Lab to push robots, abilities for real-life applications by being more compliant and to better adapt to their environment while solving challenging tasks. And furthermore, I'd like to just announce the past few days to congratulate him on being named a TED Fellow. It's really fantastic.
Thank you.
His soft autonomous robots have earned him a place among 20 illustrious thought leaders, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Welcome, Robert.
Looking forward.
Yeah,
Thank
really
you.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
So, Robert and Daniela have actually known each other for a very long time. So I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting conversation because both of them have a pedigree, and you can search for them and see all sorts of things which they have done already. I'm sure you have. I did. The way this goes, our time together is 60 minutes. I will start our dialogue and I ask you, our audience, our participants, our guests as well, to join us in this conversation by sending questions in the chat. You can do this at any time. I'll integrate them into our conversation and seamlessly so they won't even know you've been asking these questions. You can ask a softball or a hardball question. It doesn't matter what. They're both used to it and I'm sure they can take anything. I can't promise I'll incorporate every single one of your questions, but I will do my very, very best. So with that, are we ready? Yeah?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So, Daniela, what are you working on right now that has piqued your curiosity, that's got your brain and heart and mind engaged?
Well, first of all, Chris, let me say thank you for having me in this preeminent forum. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. And Robert, who is my former brilliant PhD student, now a professor at ETH, and all the audience. I greatly admire ETH, and it's a true honor to be here.
Thank you.
Now, going back to your question, I like to imagine a future with AI and robots supporting people with cognitive and physical work, with the same pervasiveness with which smartphones support us with computing work today. And to this end, my focus is on the development of the science and engineering of autonomy, meaning developing our foundational mathematical understanding of what it means for a machine and for a being to be autonomous, and then building engineered machines and applications that embody the principles behind autonomy. So now, maybe this was a mouthful. Let me give you a little bit of context. The first industrial robot that was introduced in the world was called the Unimate. It was introduced in 1961 and it was invented to do industrial pick-and-place operations. We are 60 years after that moment, and the number of industrial robots has reached millions, tens of millions. And these industrial robots are masterpieces of engineering. They can do so much more than people do. And yet, these robots remain isolated from people on factory floors because they're large and heavy and very dangerous to be around. And so we'd like to have robots, we'd like to have machines that are softer and safer to be around. And this is where our work with robots come in. Now, if you compare an industrial robot with an organism in nature, organisms in nature are soft and compliant and so much more dexterous and intelligent. Just think about an elephant trunk and how it can be so delicate and at the same time so strong. Or think about the octopus or any other organism in nature that you like. Now, all these systems can bend and twist continuously and compliantly, and have the potential to be so much more dexterous than robots, and they can move with so much strength than robots. We would like to have machines called soft robots that can do the same. And so I am inspired by nature to rethink what a robot is. Because while the past 60 years have defined the field of industrial robots and have empowered hard-bodied machines to execute complex tasks in constrained industrial settings, I believe that the next 60 years will be ushering in robots for human-centric environment and our time with robots helping people with physical tasks. And I would like to make one more observation. If you think about the robots that have been introduced over the past 60 years, they're primarily inspired by the human form. They're industrial manipulators or humanoids, or we sometimes have boxes on wheels. Now, I believe that the next stage will be soft robots inspired by the animal kingdom and by the built environment, where broad form diversity and broader applications. And I also believe that while the robots of the past 60 years have been built out of hard plastics and metals, the next 60 years will bring us machines made of all types of materials available to us through engineered processes like wood, plastic, paper, ice, even food. Perhaps we will have food robots. So in my lab, we are developing computational approaches for designing this new type of machine, this new type of soft robots. And we're looking at how to create them out of a wide range of materials, including silicon, paper, and even food. And we're also looking at how to build brains that will control these machines to be very capable. We are also looking at how to develop more intuitive interactions between robots and people, so that you don't have to be a robotics expert in order to use a robot.
Thank you, Daniela. I mean, do you ever sleep? Just sort of. It seems like I don't know if you're doing all of that. I don't know how you could.
I can tell you that Daniela always thought sleeping is important.
I tell you that I actually do sleep, and in fact, I believe sleep is super important. I tell the students that all studies about the human brain and sleep show that adults need 7.5 hours of sleep a night in order to be maximally efficient. If you sleep less, you will not be cognitively as present. In fact, there are some studies that show that if you have less than 4.5 hours of sleep a night, your cognitive function drops to that of someone who's legally drunk. So sleep is super important. But I tell you, what is the secret? The secret is working with brilliant students like Robert.
Yes. Well, let's get to Robert then, because I only had 6.5 hours sleep last night. So I'm not quite drunk, but I'm not quite as sharp as Daniela, I guess. So What are you up to right now?
So I slept 7.5 hours.
All right, well done. You had
Following on
you
your
had to
list.
say that, right? So there you go.
But not every night, so
Yeah,
that was
okay.
definitely a good night. So to pick up from this line, I'm very much inspired by the idea of like rethinking the way that we build the actuation of these robots, the way we basically conceive how we put muscles into our robots. Because when we started thinking about robotics, I mean, by we, I'm talking about everyone who's ever thought
Sure.
about robots,
Yeah.
going back to the Unimate, that was really because back then we only knew about combustion engines and we knew about electromagnetic motors and gearboxes. That was our toolbox, right? That's all we had. So what I'm thinking with my group, we're really looking into how could you rethink that process by not wanting to rely on these systems anymore. Because when we started off with soft robotics, we were still relying on those systems, like thinking of the robotic fish that I've built with Daniela. We were still having in the background a pump, and there was a motor in there. And so the big issue here is we always fall back to the things that are sort of convenient to us because they are part of our toolbox, part of building robots. And so if we completely throw this overboard and we think of what can we do in terms of replicating muscles like we have them in nature, like we do muscles, or even using other, let's say, biological materials, or even other types of actuation that don't rely on coils that can twist around a magnet. That's really what I'm interested in, and how do you do this exploration of that space computationally to figure out, because coming up as a designer with this art of like an expert design insight is really challenging. So we're saying we want to not use this motor, we're defining a whole different space of design that we want to use, and then explore that space systematically with computational tools that Daniela and I, we are both interested in. And then this way we want to come up with completely new creatures.
So you mentioned something which intrigued me greatly when you said, well, the first fish you did, you actually had a mechanical pump.
We had a pump, but the actual actuator in the back was soft. It was a silicone actuator that was all soft, but in the front of the fish, there was still a pump. The pump was basically a gear pump, so same as you would find them in typical household applications or in your boat, basically. Yeah.
We all have pumps in our bodies. In nature, they're pumps, but they don't have gears.
They don't have gears, and they're not spinning super fast.
Right.
Their nature is pulsating.
Right, exactly. So.
And these are all continuous flow, highly turbulent, these mechanical systems. So we need to think about, do we really want that? Like I was inspired the other day by, I heard this was a podcast about, they observed during the pandemic that whales are talking with each other again. You might have heard about this, but like they observed that whales they're talking again because we're not having whale watching going on. People are not going on the boats. There's much less traffic on the oceans. So think about all the noise that we're introducing with these fast spinning propellers that cause all this twirl.
It's a cacophony of noise from us.
Exactly, and we don't care because we love the music around us, but those whales, they're living in the ocean, they're probably really overplasted. They can just scream for each other, they can't talk anymore. So I think we need to rethink about how we build boats even. Like we need to rethink how we...
Interesting.
Like we shouldn't just be like focused on these individual robots. We should rethink many machines in some sense.
I think so. So in your lab, as you just said, you're not just rethinking what we think the android thing, but everything that we do in our lives.
Right, because we do everything, have approached all these mechanical engineering problems with this pump, with this geared system in mind. Why don't we just throw this overboard and we think about it differently?
I get it. Throw it overboard, right? Over the. That's really good. So let's. I like that. But let me.
Let it sink down to the bottom of the ocean.
Oh no, gosh. Oh. Since we're.
And Chris.
Yes.
Chris, maybe I can interject and say that there are some really wonderful synergies between the work in Robert's lab, where the objective is to throw the pump overboard, and other work at MIT, in my lab and in the lab of my collaborators, where we are actually using machine learning and robotic sensors to listen in on what the whales are saying and to try to decode their language, to try to figure out what they're saying to each other.
That's very cool. And when we figure that out, when we can actually begin to listen to trees as well as they talk over eons, I mean it seriously.
Yeah.
I think we're going to learn so much. I mean, this is really cool. But I'm very different. I want to go back. Danielle, how did you get into this world of robotics? Did you wake up one day and just said, I'm fascinated by this? Or was this an evolutionary process? Or what was it?
It's a process that involved multiple steps. I wonder if you've ever watched the show Fantasia.
Of course.
I loved the show when I was a kid. And in this show, there is a piece where Mickey summons the broomstick in the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I've loved this piece ever since I can remember. It's a piece that shows you can bring to life, you can animate everyday objects. And in Fantasia, it's magic. But what really fascinates me is that today you don't need magic to make that happen. You need robots and AI. And in fact, I can pinpoint the exact moment when I decided to go into robotics. I was an undergraduate student. I was studying computer science, math, and astronomy. And I attended a lecture by John Hopcroft, who is one of the founding fathers of the field of computer science. And in this lecture, John said, classical computer science is solved, and it is time for the grand applications. Now, what he meant was that a lot of the original problems that were introduced in the field, which were mostly graph theoretic problems, had solutions. And now it was time to open our view of what computation is and begin to consider computation that interacts with the physical world and computation that interacts with people. And so when he talked about computation that interacts with the physical world in the form of robots, I was fascinated and I really wanted to go to work with John. And I wanted to build machines that interact with the physical world. I wanted to build machines that can do what Mickey did, but now for real, not through magic. And I've always been interested in ways of bringing the world of mathematics with a more practical world, with the world of physics. This is something that I've studied since I've been a child. I was good at math, but I wanted to do something more practical than just math. And in fact, I grew up in Romania at a time when all school students had to work in a factory 1 week every month.
Yep.
The Romanian government believed that this would help us get some trade skills and prepare us to become part of the proletariat. And at the time, I was actually not very convinced that this was useful. But nevertheless, when I look back, I see so many ways in which that experience contributed to my own career journey, because I learned to use machines such as the lathe.
Yep.
I made screws from scratch.
Yep.
And at that point, I began to understand the physical aspects of making things.
Yep.
And as the math I learned in school became more abstract, I realized that I wanted to do something related to math and computation, but also something with a physical component. And to be honest, I feel like I'm here at MIT living my dream because I'm getting to build robots that bring together the world of computation and the physical world of mechanisms and materials, and all this while working towards the science and engineering of autonomy.
That's really cool. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's a great combination, and to be able to bring all those things together.
You think at MIT you actually have a chance to use a lathe or to use to go into the machine shop, and you can actually run all your ideas on the CNC lathe or on the laser cutter, and you have full access to the 3D printer. When I first started my PhD, Daniela had already invested in this really state-of-the-art, huge 3D printer that we could just quickly try out different ideas. And I think that was by itself so enabling. When you have a new idea, you want to try out something, you can just do it, and the next morning you're ready to go. And I think that's something we need to basically make sure we have everywhere. We have the student project house at ETH, but I think making that accessible to everyone and just being a bit more willing to allow people that don't have to be a trained mechanic. Let me put this out there. Like, you don't have to necessarily be a fully trained mechanic, that you could learn how to use these machines to make parts.
But there's also an advantage to having people who know how to do it.
Oh, totally. I mean, if you have to do it in large numbers, but if you're experimenting with something on a small scale.
How did you get into this? What was your were you fishing and you all of a sudden looked down and said, I want to make that?
Oh, no. It didn't start with fish, I would say.
Okay, well,
no,
what did it start with?
For me, one of the first moments I remember that I was going towards the soft robotics direction, I was very inspired by it, was I picked up this book back in the beginning of 2000s called Bionic. And it was talking about the lotus effect. It was talking about scales of shark and how we can use them for spacesuits and for better surfaces. And I thought, this is very interesting, but what can we learn about more sort of really moving things? And then later on, when I was in college and I really was looking forward to my robotics lectures and I opened the textbook, all I was seeing was people were only concerned about the mathematics of the kinematics of the robots rigidly going from one to the next. And I was shocked because my preconception of how robotics would look like when I would start it was very different to what I found in those books. So going back, connecting the bionics to when I actually started studying robotics, that's where I was like, we have to think about this differently.
And that started that direction, that vector.
That vector. And then Daniela just like was really on the money, saying like, the soft robotics direction, we have to go this way.
Very cool. Daniela,
And I want to add something, because Robert said something very important. Robert talked about how the 3D printer has made it possible to accelerate the development of new hardware, of new bodies. And this is extraordinary. It used to be that if you wanted to build a machine, you needed to get your screws and gears and motors, and it would take days and months to put the first prototype together. You test it, and then you'd have to start all over again to improve. But now with computational fabrication tools like the 3D printer and laser cutter and many other machines we have today, and with the ability to do computational design and simulation of the things we want to build, we can reduce the time it takes to design something new from months to hours and days. And this is really the power of programming, the power of abstraction, the power of bringing computation to the design and fabrication of machines.
So would you say so is that then only to a certain group who know how to do this, or is this a true democratization of robotics? I'm looking both.
Well, I see a true democratization of robotics, and I will tell you that my first faculty job was at Dartmouth College in the computer science department, where I wanted to build robots, and I had a lot of students who could program, but we didn't have the fabrication infrastructure. And so in the early 90s, when the 3D printers were introduced, I thought, okay, if we buy a 3D printer, then all the students who have learned to program, but not necessarily how to make, how to build, they can begin to build machines, because the process of building machines is now done through programming, through higher levels of abstraction. So indeed, the objective is to democratize how we think about machines, and to get to the point where someday each one of us will be able to make machines that suit our needs in a custom way, in a rapid way. Imagine if you could make your next, you could design your next car. You could have a template, and then you could instantiate parameters for exactly how you want your car to look, and then you'd push a button, and those designs would get to the factory and produce exactly the car that you want.
You know, the limitation there is actually that the original printers, they could only print one material.
Right.
And that material wasn't necessarily what the car would be made of.
No.
But what we are pushing for in our research a lot, and I have been looking at this particularly, is like how can you do multi-material prints and achieve that these prints can actually have sort of similar properties to what you would have in that otherwise very complicated machined part. And so by lowering the cost for these printers, you can make them accessible that they could send in any sort of student workshop, and you could print 4 different materials at the same time, and you could make this robot that has all of this complexity directly built in. Doesn't have to be a robot, could be something else, but it has the ability to not just be limited to that one little plastic filament with one property.
And more, and on top of that, we can also print the functional components. We can begin to design and print the functional components of the machine, the actuation system, the sensory system. So the 3D printers are now able to be augmented with, of course, our novel approaches, so that it's not just inert objects that they can fabricate. And in fact, in one of the projects in my lab, we've been exploring the possibility of getting someone to sketch what a robot might look like. So maybe you draw a stick figure of an insect, a line for the body and some lines for the legs. In using computation, we can design a printable mechanism that could then be sent to a 3D printer, and then you push a button and you get to the point where you practically have this functioning robot walk itself out of the printer. And that's extraordinary because anybody, and this goes with the democratization idea, because everybody will be able to sketch a rough idea of what machine they would want, and then with an intuitive interface and support from 3D printing and other computational fabrication tools, every one of us will be able to make our own custom robots or other machines.
So with this is the next question, with that designing your own, you said you're inspired by nature, and I'm thinking of, the Boston Dynamics dog, which is, doesn't look like anything that's inspired by nature at all.
But it's called a dog, though, right?
Yeah, but it's called a dog,
Oh,
right?
you would call it a dog,
I would
right?
call it a dog.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had, so it's very, because it was so, and this is what I'm trying to, when you say you're inspired by nature, here's a form which has 4 legs, has sort of this carrying capacity. That's not necessarily the thing which inspires you.
Not necessarily, because that's only the geometry, right? It's only the form, the shape. But I think we have to go to the physics level of this
Further
system.
down, yeah.
We have to think about its built-in, where does this thing need to be compliant? Where does it need to be stiff? And where does it need to move? And does it need to have motors or actually real muscles in it? In this Boston Dynamics spot, it's using motors, git motors, and it's using lightly fabricated link materials, right? So it's technology that's very advanced, but it's still not really bio-inspired in that sense.
It's interesting. I was just thinking, what popped into my mind was sort of an evolutionary tree, where something starts here, then you're on this tree and they're on this tree.
Right. We're still behind because we haven't done the walking.
Okay, well, maybe you're here part,
right?
yeah. But there's this idea that this 4-legged thing, and you're going this way, they're over here.
Right.
Yeah, and then there'll be more branches eventually.
Exactly, and I think if you keep going that way, you will hit a limit at some point. Because truly, you don't want to have in your living room, like Daniela was talking about democratizing these robots.
Yep.
You don't want to have in your living room a robot that is a steel machine that can maybe hurt you really badly if it malfunctions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that, especially this. When you were saying that, I was remembering Fantasia because I remember it very well. As a matter of fact, I watch it every once or every few years, and not just the broomstick, but then you had the bucket and you had the plates. You had essentially the entire kitchen animated. And could you imagine, for you, when you think of your vision, I'm assuming it's not just the broomstick, but it's the entire kitchen which is animated. Or what is your vision for where we're actually going to head? Do you have this picture in your mind? Like I think of Blade Runner. Blade Runner is a very soft robots, replicants.
Yeah.
Right? Is that where you, or tell me, help me understand that.
I think many systems, not just the robots themselves, could be built with built-in compliance. And as long as we understand how to properly model and control that well, then we can also, I mean, I'm looking at this question popping up here, like if you want to make them, the general criticism to these systems is you're worried about they're not going to be accurate, they're not going to be robust to certain things, because we only used to these rigid robots that can nicely weld your car. But I think if we really have good control over them, then we actually have so much more advantages of these things to be compliant. And they can suddenly do things in a much more homogeneous way with us when we interact with them. The way we like to interact with each other, we also would like to interact with all these household machines. And the true intelligence comes to a mix of having intelligent behaviors that can answer to you, but also maybe react to you in a way.
Daniela, what about you? How do you answer that question? When you think about looking forward, you started laying out a bit of your vision before about the autonomy, and how things, the bend and twist, inspired by the elephant trunk, the octopus leg. What do you imagine? Well, help us imagine. I'm imagining like this octopus thing kind of walking around in my room going rap, 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 rap. That's not what you're talking about. Right.
No, but I'll answer the question, but I want to go back to your idea of the kitchen and the kitchen robot. And I want to say that I do want to have an Iron Chef robot. I would love a robot that will just know how to make food for me, how to help me make food. I already worked on such a robot. In fact, we have a robot we call BakeBot. BakeBot was able to read recipes of cookies and turn them into actual product, into actual cookies. And this actually really inspires me to think about machines that could help us end the chores that we do not enjoy doing. Now, I happen to love cooking, but I also have moments when I really wish I could have a sous chef or someone who could help me with a prep and who could help me get my meals in order. And I think we're developing the skills and the control and the brain and the decision making of machines that could get us there. I like to, going back to your question about what the future might look like, I really want machines that help us with cognitive and physical tasks. And this could mean awakening the still objects in our lives by turning them into intelligent, actuatable machines. And we can do so. I mean, in some sense, the broom in The Sorcerer's Apprentice is an example of how an awakened, still everyday object could become actuatable, could become intelligent. But it goes beyond that. It goes towards a world where we can get superpowers through machines. We can become stronger, we can reach further, we can see better, we can really offload the chores that we don't want to do so that we have time to focus on the things that allow us to self-actualize.
I think it's really important because it's always interesting when you go to the flea markets. One person's junk is another person's treasure. One person's chore is another person's joy. And so, right, and like you said, like you love to cook, I'm not really. So, it's interesting to think about how this was the democratization of different typologies which we might be able to see
Yeah.
in the future. Just again, coming back to nature, there is not one animal, there's not one phyla, there's hundreds and thousands. So as you think of this question around bioconvergence and bioconvergent systems, and how will robotics and bio come together in both of your minds over the next 20 years? Right? How do you see this? Because you said the muscle is one, but what else?
I think if we look at how we're currently producing all of our machines and products in this world, they're not sustainable, right? We are building things that then get burnt in the end, majority of them. They are not really, like every time we build something, every time we build even a robot, it's not something that can easily be recycled or easily be reused. So I think from a bioconvergence, we can obviously look, as we have been discussing, the bio-inspiration, we being inspired how nature does it. But if we truly take it to the point of saying nature is actually also a cradle to cradle, like, do you know this concept of cradle to cradle? Like,
Of course, yeah.
so you can take a robot and you could think about, can you build this out of materials that will in the end be something you can trust, be happily sink, you throw it overboard, or you put it on the ground and it will just decay and it will not leave something behind. So can we truly build machines that are animated, but they're also gonna not add to the footprint of us humans towards the planet?
That's really cool. I really like that because it's a challenge.
That's a true challenge.
This
it's
is a
not easy, right?
true challenge, and I hope, my friend, you can really figure that one out, because that's a big one. You know, we're running out of stuff, right? So that's But what about you, Tanya? What do you think about this question? I mean, he just said he's gonna make a cradle to cradle robot before he retires.
Well, actually, it's a really important idea, and it's one where my group has done some work. Other groups around the world have done some work, and it goes back to what I said at the beginning, that by choosing different materials for the body of the robot, we can achieve different properties. We can choose to make our machines out of biodegradable materials. And in fact, we have shown the possibility of having small origami shaped machines that can dissolve in water. And so when the robot is done doing the task, it could just go to the recycling bin. I have to tell you that I've been kind of fascinated about the question you asked, like, how many robots will there be? Will there be one robot that will do everything? Will there be multiple robots that will do everything? And for many years, I have been very interested in the possibility of building cell-level robotics. So I was wondering whether there could be a unit robotic cell that could combine with other cells to make anything and everything you want. So imagine maybe a bag that has this kind of smart sand in it, and every time you need a tool, you reach in the bag, and the bag gives you exactly the tool you need. When you're done with it, you push the tool back, and the particles disintegrate or disconnect, and then you can make another tool next time. And so this is an area called modular self-reconfiguring robots, and several groups are working on this problem. It turns out that we have really good algorithms that say how particles should connect to one another to make anything. But when it comes to fabricating these units, we are in trouble, because we do not know how to make these unit cells at a scale where they would be useful. We can make them at big scales, but not at a small scale. One of the first simulations we did in this space, we called the dog couch. It was this idea that you could have a couch that could turn itself into a dog, and then the dog could become a couch. And while we have the algorithms that allow these particles to reorganize, to have your electronic pet and then your comfortable couch, we actually do not know how to make these objects so that the couch will be comfortable to sit on. And this points to the importance of working on both the body of the robot, as Robert described, and the brain, because you kind of need both.
Yeah.
And intelligence is in some sense split between body and brain. And it's always a deep question to think about how much work should be done by the body and how much work should be done by the brain that's associated with the machine.
Yeah, that's quite. I mean, that's a fascinating question because you mentioned the octopus before. It has a distributed brain, and so there's no. So we don't have to just have one type, which makes me think about autonomous, sort of the whole world of autonomous Internet of Things. And so this idea of smart dust or.
You know, an octopus is actually, within its short lifespan, it's building up an incredible amount of intelligence, or however you want to quantify this. Like you can trap them in a mason jar.
And they'll figure it out how to
They
get out.
figure out how to open the lid and get out,
Yeah.
and they never have been trapped in there before, right? So that's something they can just do with their tactile behaviors and with like trying out things. But I think when we want to create the brain, what we truly need to also do, we not just need to democratize the way of how we build them with 3D printers, we need to make our computational frameworks to bring them to the point that everyone has an easy time to access them, because there's a lot of rush usually towards we want to be first to bring out an idea. And I have to say, academia doesn't give you a lot of incentive to take that initial prototype of an idea and bring it to the level that people can, like, everyone can use it, and it's very easy, low threshold access that you could take the computational tool and now start producing your robots of your dream. Because we all have certain preferences. We like cooking, or we like to not have someone do our laundry. But there's so many other people in the world that have other preferences, and they could come up with an idea, and if they could use the computational tools, that's really also a challenge that we have to overcome.
Totally hear you. I want to ask a very different question. One of you, I can't remember who mentioned robots from food. Who
I did.
Doesn't Daniela mention?
You've got to go, hello, next generation robot is going to be my Geschnetzeltes or my Rösti that I'm going to eat downtown?
Well, you could have a robotic pill that is made out of food that you can ingest. And once in the body, you could direct to patch a wound, to deliver medicine very precisely, to take a tissue sample. All this without pain, without incisions, without the risk of infections. And so I'm really excited about the possibility of having tiny robotic mini surgeons that would be made out of food so that they could be digestible, and that you could use in place of a complex surgical procedure. And this is another area we have some preliminary research in. We call our robot the mini origami surgeon. And our mini origami surgeon is able to remove button batteries that people sometimes accidentally ingest. And these button batteries are very dangerous because within 30 minutes they can pierce the tissue. And right now, in order to remove them, you have to undergo a surgical procedure. So if you could have one of these safe to ingest robots, this particular aspect of surgery could be greatly advanced. And we can imagine other applications. And this, by the way, this robot is made out of sausage casing.
Oh,
If
really?
you're wondering. Yeah.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
We can actually make these robots also with a mix of a degradable polymer and with bacteria in them. Because bacteria by themselves have great health effects in that sense that you can use them for immunotherapy-like applications. So imagine you would swallow such a pill, and it's made with a polymer, and you build in a non-toxic magnetic material. You then can have this go around your tumor, for example. So you wouldn't just be like you would actually be going in and something that previously would require to cut you fully open
Sure.
or to go in with an endoscope and trying to figure out a way. Why don't you like rethink and make this robot out of living material? So it's not anymore something that you have to be aware it's going in your body, and you then control it externally.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm fascinated by both of you of really challenging my view of what is a robot. I mean, it's really, I'm very curious because there are some who'll define a robot as a self-actuated, self-thinking thing that does, but you're like, your spectrum is pretty big.
Yeah, like I mean, when people hear about soft robots, for example, they first think of this like soft, squishy octopus, for example, right? But truly, I think robotics and soft robotics, but also just the field of robotics, is very broad. It goes into all areas. It does not just touch on the traditional robotic arm at all, necessarily.
So how do you control these things? I mean, I'm just like I'm thinking like I come back to some of the mechanical robots. They've got a little processor. They got a processor. They've got actuator. They can be. How do you do this with a soft robot? I mean, or what you're talking about with your pill, or with the origami? How do you control these systems? That's intriguing. Is it like you tell me you have to kill me, or is it? How do you do it?
Well, look, for every robot, you need a sensory system, a perception system that gives the robot some knowledge about its surrounding task or its configuration, and then you need a module that figures out how to move in response of the input. And then the robot needs to be able to control what it does. So I guess in general, you need perception, you need a planning and decision-making module, and then you need actuation. Now, for hard-bodied robots, there has been a very long body of literature that precisely describes how you achieve any motion you want. Because rigid body mathematics, geometry, physics is very well understood. In the case of soft robots, we have infinite degrees of freedom, and we can model these robots with PDEs, but there is just such a wide range of possibilities. In fact, the range of configurations is really infinite, and so the challenge is how to come up with practical computational tools that enable the control of these flexible things to be exactly what you want. And so now this is the theory. So this is at the high level.
Right.
The practicum for how you actually achieve this really depends on the context. It depends on what the body of the machine looks like, what the machine has to do, and what the task is. Right. So in the case of the origami pill, we actually have an off-body brain in our current setup. So the robot has a tiny magnet that's embedded in it, and we can locate accurately the position of the robot, and then we can use an externally controllable magnetic field to drive the robot where we want it to be. And so that's how this ingestible machine looks like. We're currently working on removing the need for the external magnetic field and adding to the robot a light and a camera and a kind of a local computational source. In the case of a soft manipulator, the control would be very different. If the soft manipulator is attached to a robotic arm, then we can add motors, we can add actuation by vacuuming, we can add pumps, as Robert said. If we wanted to do it all without pumps and without vacuuming, then we do something different. We use motors. The community has been developing soft materials that can be controlled using what is called fluidic actuation. This requires external pumps. We also have soft materials that can be controlled in more in more compact ways using tiny motors we can attach to them.
Okay. You want to add anything, or is that?
Yeah, I think the one thing I would like to add is the thought that so far, because Daniela was mentioning, we have this rich literature of controls that was developed for classical robots. So we are currently in the stage of transitioning where we are still trying to use some of that knowledge generated for traditional robots, but seeing how we can apply them to these partial differential equations, these PDEs that Daniela was mentioning, that actually govern the continuity of our world. And so what has been particularly interesting to me is, can we come up with very fast methods that actually can really model the fluids that we're living in and also the solids that deform? And if we can, with machine learning methods, model those quickly, and so in a way that we can use it for controls, because when we're talking about controls, we're talking about something occurring on the matters of tens or hundreds of milliseconds.
Yep.
And you need to close the loop at a reasonable rate, otherwise you're not getting a good fast motion out of it. Otherwise, it's just going to not move well, right? Yeah. And so if you can really model that complex nature, we can suddenly go really freeform of what we're building, right? We're not anymore constrained to preconceived assumptions that our robot can only bend around one axis. We can start bending in all axes if we have full control about its dynamic physical interactions.
Which an elephant trunk or an octopus leg, they're completely free.
Exactly, the same as the robot that goes through your guts. All of them should ideally be moving freely, and it's not just about the robot itself, but also about the surrounding that matters in this case. Right? Because you're interacting with the walls, you're interacting with the liquid you're in, and you need to understand what's going on there.
Interesting. So what one thing in your lives currently do you wish could be replaced by a robotic interaction?
Well, I have an example.
I don't like. Go ahead, Robert.
So you know how everyone is talking about these great bodysuits you could be developing for the metaverse, right? You want to be having these
Full haptic.
full haptic, right?
Yeah.
I actually think that's not going to be great, and let me explain why. So Daniela and I, we worked on this notion of providing to users with visual impairment, blind people. We were making the system that allowed them to get feedback about what's going on in their surroundings. So we actually embarked on this challenge of building wearable devices with little linear vibrating units that would tell the user, oh, there's an obstacle, there's no obstacle. And so that was very interesting, but this would never give the blind user, or even if you were to do this for you in your VR application, it wouldn't give them the actual sort of sensation of someone's giving you a handshake or giving you a touch on the shoulder. So I think really the next level of if we end up in the next pandemic, or we have another time where we cannot see our friends or beloved ones close by, I think the bodysuit might not be as good as if you would actually have some VR mixed interaction with a robot. So the robot giving you that physical sensation, like the handshake or the touch on the shoulder, and your VR is giving you the full visual of this like imagined world, so that I could, for example, give Daniela a handshake or give her a touch on her shoulder if I wanted to, and that would be the robot sitting across from her in her room.
Interesting. That's interesting. I'm thinking of the Addams Family with the hand which comes out of the box just to say hi, something.
Yeah.
Not quite like that, but that's the image that popped into my head. Daniel, what about for you? You have an answer too.
Well, yeah, actually, I want a lot of things. I actually want my sweater to be a robot. I want to take advantage of all the advancements in computational fibers to empower my clothing, my shoes to be
what would it do?
intelligent. And then I want more. So let me just say, like I want my shoes to become very elastic, so I could jump really high when I'm on a basketball court with much taller friends. So I can, in some sense, get the superpower
Okay.
of overcoming gravity. And in addition to that, I want the flying car. I mean, I get the flying car is not a robot, but I want to never be stuck in traffic again. So I want to be able to fly. If I'm in congestion, I want to be able to lift in the third dimension and go fast where I need to go.
Well, okay, what would your sweater do? I'm just trying to think of a robotic sweater. I'm literally trying to
Yeah.
imagine what's it going to do?
Well, you could have sensors that keep track of your vitals, and for healthy people, maybe this is not so critical. But for people who have various conditions, this
Sure.
could be super important. You could have a wearable stethoscope, and if you have any kind of digestive problems, those could be
So,
tagged before they actually cause problems.
so,
You could have sensors that keep track of your ergonomics, and if you have to do
yeah.
if you have a job that requires you to lift heavy things, or if you have or if you're not if your spine is not entirely straight, you could have little actuators that could help
It's an
that
exoskeleton. It
could
turns
act
into an
like
exoskeleton. Yeah.
exoskeletons
Okay.
to help you out.
So you're taking a DARPA T-shirt and turning it into a sweater. So it's sort of like, which is, yeah, that's cool. So for me, when I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's sort of an intelligent, it's sensing, but then you move to the actuating, because me and a robot always had the actuator. That's the difference between the sensing and the actuating, between just smart stuff, and when it begins to move, begin to actuate, then it moves in, for me, goes over the edge into robotics. That's how I'm supposed to understand this.
You should actually think even about that the structure that is actuating is actually also capable of sensing at the same time. Like you have the sensors fully integrated into your robots, so they know that this actuator is moving a certain way. It has something like inside of it that will tell you how much you're moving, but also something on the outside that will tell you what I'm touching on or what is my interaction with the world. And the cameras that you should
You
have.
can,
Yeah.
Say
yeah,
again?
you can have robotic skin, right? You can have robotic skin that allows you to experience the world and see the world through touch.
Wow. You guys, I mean, seriously, wow. This idea of robotic touch, the cradle to cradle robot, being able to have a sweater which can help me live better and to sit up straighter or give me strength, literally give me strength. You zip it on, quite fascinating. And at some point when it no longer fits, you can pass it on to somebody and put it into the biodigester, and it's there. So, I mean, what a world. I mean, this is truly phenomenal. We just have 2 minutes left. It's hard to believe the hour is almost gone.
Whoa.
I mean, truly, this is one of the fastest hours I've had in a long time. 3 words when you think of, say, 2050 and the next generation of robots. What are the 3 words which come to your mind that you want us to take away? Soft, compliant. No, go ahead.
Daniela, you go first.
3 words. What are 3 words for you?
Soft, friendly, assistive.
Soft, friendly, assistive.
I would have gone with caring,
You are going with it.
sustainable,
Yep.
and intelligent.
Fantastic. I hope that those 6 words become part of our lives. And I'm really excited that the 2 of you and your teams, your labs, are on our way to getting there. I think this is a very fascinating, beautiful world if we can get there. So thank you both very much for your presence here with us and for your passion. That's really wonderful. So thank you. Yeah,
Thank you for
Thank
having
you
us.
for the opportunity.
it's wonderful. I want to thank all of you, our audience for joining us and for putting your questions in. I didn't get to all of them, but I came pretty close, so I do hope that you will forgive me for not getting all of them. This next lecture in the Global Lecture Series will be on International Women's Day on the 8th of March with Professor Emeritus Alice Eagley from Northwestern and ETH Zurich's Vice President for Personal Development and Leadership, Dr. Julia Donald. It's going to be an absolutely wonderful conversation, completely different topic as we had today, but I can promise you as rich and as insightful. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today. Stay healthy, eat an apple, drink some water, and have a great day. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.